So this is the Hex chart, guys. This was the beginning. This was the beginning of the entire story. One thing is we don't have all the price data because the first couple weeks of Hex, the price was based in Bitcoin, and it was on an exchange, I believe it was called Bidesk at the time. And the roughly the starting price is this yellow line up here on, like, it was between 3 and 4 tenths of a cent. So that key level actually is significant in P-Hex even to this day. That 3 tenths of a cent, 4 tenths of a cent. We actually bottomed around there not too long ago here on P-Hex. And so this, I think it's just really cool how you see these levels play out, 5 years into the game, and show their significance. But that was the starting price for Hex, was up here. And again, I don't have the data that goes back to the launch date of December 2nd, 2019, but it really doesn't matter anyways, because pretty much the price just got moved down. People were going to the adoption amplifier and getting coins from there and then arbing the price down on the exchanges, and people were fighting back and forth between 1 and 2 satoshis to basically double their money and sell. And then I know Johnny Chaos famously got left behind on one of those early days moves, probably somewhere down here on the bottoming. It was on the BTC pair. And then the price doubled and never went back. I guess this is a daily chart. As we move forward through time, the price crashed 99% before it ever did the 10,000x. So that's like the first most important piece to know. And the bottom date was February 5th. This wick here, you can kind of exclude it. It wasn't really indicative of real volume. This was because this is pulling data from a Uniswap pair or some other side pair that wasn't as relevant at the time. But that actual bottoming price was around like 3 zeros and a 5. So even Pulse and PulseX are still below those price targets today, just for comparison's sake. But then sometime in February, there was like the first markup, and it ran 6x in 5 days. And that was, early February of 2020. And then after some sideways consolidation, I do remember this period of time, and you can see the volume spikes down here on price. There was like a FUD event that was going around in February of 2020 where I questioned whether I should name names, but this guy was pretty public anyways with what he did. So I'll just kind of explain where I can the people that were involved. But there was a huge FUD wave that went through the Hex community around this time after having this 6x markup, where people were like confused, concerned that the origin address of Hex was taking coins that it had received in the form of Ethereum and then recycling through the adoption amplifier to basically level out and even the playing field between the market price and the adoption amplifier price, so that there wasn't cohorts of people getting like all of the supply for that given day. So if you don't remember how that worked out, in the AA days, you'd put your ETH into the pool and there was like 550 million Hex per day that got emitted to the people who put into the adoption amplifier, and that going on for the first year. But during this particular phase is when the OA actually started to act by redepositing ETH in there to like take a bunch of the supply off the market and prevent massive arbitrages from happening, so that it wouldn't put so much sell pressure on the chart. And we'll find this over and over, this theme of the OA stepping in ways to remove supply from the market as we go forward. But this particular time is when that Nightly character, if you know who he is, he got out there and started making videos about how he'd started doing some chain analysis and said, hey, this is what's happening. This is likely to be scam-like behavior, because we had no way to know for sure, because you, as a founder, you can't publicly state your goals, or otherwise you're creating expectations, and that's like illegal. So I remember he famously dumped a bunch of it off this price performance here. He dumped a bunch of his supply and emergency and staked a bunch, and then tried to get the community to follow him off the cliff, so to speak, into another token that kind of emulated what Hex did, called Wise. And to this day, I think the Wise Ethereum pool, so the token that he ended up creating, has one of the biggest liquidity pools in all of Ethereum, because it was one of the first examples of locked liquidity. So, Hex laid the groundwork, and tons of copycats came after it. And this was just one of those periods where early on in its life, we saw people leave and go to a copy, and a lot of that volume is represented here, but there's also more that was on other exchanges. And anyway, so it was short lived, and by March, the price had already started to recover again, and within 20 days, it was back up another 3.5x off that low. And it might have been more because we're not capturing all the wicks. The early day data is kind of not all here, but that led into basically this period of consolidation before price discovery. So up until this point, even though I'm like a day zero Hexagon, so to speak, and I did participate in days 1 and 2, during this period of time, there wasn't that much awareness around Hex, and there wasn't a lot of activity or interest, or there was like this diehard community that was into it then, but it wasn't the same as like what happened after we saw the infamous God whale come in and start to create massive price appreciation in a very short period of time. And I remember this period here was in April. There was like a 2x in price in a single candle, and I want to say that it was 10,000 ETH market buy. I think it was a 10,000 ETH market buy that basically doubled the price in a single candle. And I think that's here. So between these two candles, basically you get this 2x move. That was just like, it really started to set the Hex bull market in motion. And then there was all this follow through that came through as well. And this was a pretty cool time to be in Hex. I remember after this single doubling, the price ended up doing another 5x on top of it. And this is like where the market really started to pay attention to Hex a lot more. This year is, I'm calculating about a 12 or 13x move in 27 days. And then that marked the local top for that time. This is when people like Kareem came on the scene and got really vocal about staking. And there was a bunch of guys like Cabana and Big Kirk and I mean, there's tons of early OGs, RG and Dollar Cost and Hexo. They were all very public during this period and kind of trying to share information about what Hex was and how it worked. And everyone was kind of figuring this stuff out on the staking side of things going into big payday. So, you know, by the end of May, we had topped on Hex. And you could say that was like its first cycle, really, truly. And then price really went into a bit of a decline. I think price dropped like 60 to 70% here. Saying 60% drop over a 45-day period. So in the first, you got to think in this short period of time between December of 2019 and then the bottom on January 5th, and then through till the following June, the price had already done a crazy, even from that local low, it had already done like a 55x. And I remember at that time, RH was talking about how many X's we did versus Bitcoin, how many X's we did versus Ethereum, and then obviously the X's versus the dollar, which I have represented here. And this was getting to be exciting because there was a bunch of new money flowing into the space. And around this time, Uniswap started to get popularized because of Hex's success. And a lot of that trading volume moved off of the few centralized exchanges that we had and moved onto Uniswap. And as people started to learn how to do that, price started to recover, to use the Uniswap to like basically get in and get out and stuff. Price started to recover, and then it came up here and did like a topped out right at a double top, a pretty important area to this day too. I'll mark this one out. It's basically 0.6 cents. So what I got for you here is basically where the price of Hex had always had some bit of a floor price, which was up here between like 3 and 0.6 cents. And as we go forward, you'll see the significance of those levels going forward. But at that point in July, it was the middle of DeFi summer, and so there was a lot of capital rotating between Hex gains and all these other opportunities as well. Like I think Aave came out, and obviously Uniswap was out at that point, and you had people like Richard even saying, "Hey, rotate your free airdrop money from these other things into Hex and stake it for mad returns." And but there was just a shift of capital, and the FUD never really stopped because this was all leading into what would be the big payday, which was the end of the adoption amplifier, and kind of the most exciting twist of fate that we would ever see in Hex. So at this point, So there was a double top, price retraced all the way down to new lows. It was a 69% crash, so 70% crash. And because the books were so thin at that time, it was really a game of playing with liquidity back when nobody really knew or understood how that stuff really worked to the same capacity as they do today. To give myself some credit, and many of you other people out there who have educated the community on how to use this stuff have went on and created projects and done amazing things on PulseChain with like the stuff that, you know, Richard and a few of the early hex whales were doing back here, which was like removing liquidity at certain areas to make it easier to pump, or adding liquidity to buffer and support price. This was all going on during this period of time to try to get the price back up to make new all-time highs. It was always a combination of that, and then just that real world demand that kind of created this breakout moment going into big payday in November of 2020. So what happened was market makers bottomed the price. There was like a small accumulation range in here. And I remember myself, this is where I really started to pay attention to the chart, was in this consolidation point right here, because it was clear that if this could hold, this is going to make a big rip going into this exciting mass yield day, this big payday event. And so it makes logical sense that there's a run up on price and markets that goes into like a big event. Just how it always is with launches. And once the launch happens, it's usually this idea of sell the news. And that's exactly what happened for Hex. But it was interesting, right? Because in this case, the price, let's see, in terms of percent, we got a 7x. Not unlike we had a 7x in Hex last year, from the bottom around 0.3 cents up to almost 2 cents. I think it was like 1.8 cents or something. Or no, it was like 2.4, I think. We'll check it in a second. But it was a 7x move roughly. So Hex is known to do these 5 to 7x moves over the course of this chart already 3 times. And so then what happened was, on the day before the big payday, the OA came in and staked all of its Hex that it had gotten through the adoption amplifier. So this caused even more concern, more FUD, because people didn't know. Many people looked at that and were disillusioned by that, thinking they were going to have these huge APRs and they were going to be able to pull off their stakes the day after big payday and dump all this value for all this capital, right? That was just sitting in these pools up here. And so that's where there was the initial sell-off. This was leading into the event. There was the first sell-off, and then there was a consolidation and the possibility that this would not crash, right? And then the OA goes and stakes, and it flooded a lot of people out anyway. It would have been sold off anyway. It was amplified and freaked out a bunch of people. Price dropped 89% in just a couple days, and created this huge wick. And I remember this day so strongly because Hexologist had a stream going on, and he bought the bottom of this wick. It was like around like 0.002 ish. I remember him putting the buy order through on stream with a bunch of the guys on the 24-hour big payday stream. And this was my first real exposure to the community, was watching that stream, because even though I had been in Hex for that long, I didn't really know that there was like a community here that was actively like participating and communicating with each other and had something good going on. Because at this point I hadn't even came out of the woodwork yet and started streaming with like whales in the early days and all that. Yeah, so the price bottomed off that low, and then it created this, like, this was a really interesting time, because there was a lot of like the cult mindset had been set in for sure, because there was a camp of people that really thought that what the OA did made sense and was good long term for the system. And then there was the camp that said this is scammy, and then they all basically got out here. But as the price was able to create a double bottom fairly effortlessly in just like, I think it was like 15 days. Yeah, so it was 20 days it bottomed out here. I remember watching these candles here specifically on like an hourly chart, and just watching this thing pop around like 1 or 2 tenths of a cent. And then here you have just this little candle here was a 50% candle in a day. That was really indicative of strength and demand that we just didn't know would be there until this started to play out. And as the price reclaimed each key level, it just refused to go break those levels over and over and over again. It just kept making higher highs and higher lows. And this is where the FOMO really started to set in, I think, for Hex users, is like, okay, this thing survived big payday. It's making new highs and new lows every few days. My time to buy coins at these prices is running out. And you could see how like these periods of time are very short before it ran up to the high again. And so there was a definite, there's definitely a voice in the back of every hardcore Hexican's head saying, I got to get as much get as much money into this thing during this period as possible, like this mass FOMO. And then on New Year's Eve of December of 2021, so going into January 1st of 21, the price actually wicked all the way up to about 2 cents. So I'll put a line here for that. You can't see it on this chart, but this candle here pumped all the way to 2 cents in a single candle, which was like a doubling. And then that marked a local top. So it was the new all-time high, a local top. And then that went into this period of sideways accumulation above 0.6 of a cent. And I remember this period really, really clearly as being like a huge accumulation range. And it seemed so, when you're watching the chart pump like this, you know, it takes this many days, like, I don't know, 30 days of sell off to tap a low, and then it just pumps right back. And it pumped right back in like 10 days or something. And then it did it again. And then it created like something to look for. And even in our charts today is these periods here on like a 15-minute chart or an hourly chart where you see a price candle print down or print up, and then it wicks back. It's indicative of that there's market makers that are absorbing supply at a level. And so that's what was occurring during this period. It was just kind of like these were like little washout periods to remove dead sell pressure from the chart early before the bigger markup phase. And I remember this period really clearly. It was the same kind of feeling as we had here, but this time it was like, all right, the confidence was growing that Hex was going to go on to take out 2 cents and go a lot higher. And then that's exactly what happened. We started to see big buys from Godwhale and a couple other big wallets that moved the price up slowly over the next, like, I don't know, 20 days ish, maybe. It says 31 days. So 1 month between March of 21 to April, where they marked the price up to the high at 2 cents where that yellow line is. And then they let it bleed one more time. And then this was like the big move where like Godwhale and a lot of the big players stepped in and marked it up to, it's saying it wicked up to 8 cents. Like this was around the time frame when the PulseChain sacrifice got announced. And so then the game became like, all right, let's make this thing as expensive as possible, and then use the Hex to sacrifice for this new blockchain that Richard was going to launch at some point. And so we had these were like the glory days of Hex, where it just seemed like we couldn't lose and everything was going amazing. And we just, even though things would sell off, they would always recover. It just felt like there was a constant bid under price, and for all intents and purposes, there was. And basically between the announcement date of PulseChain and then the actual sacrifice going live, from this local low to this high, price appreciated another 5.5x. So you had 5x more PulseChain sacrifice power than you would have had otherwise. And there was a lot of games that went on after the PulseChain sac went live. And so at this point, I remember on this particular candle here, the price actually wicked to 21 cents. I was sitting in my living room, and this candle here actually wicked all the way up here to 21 cents at this yellow line, and was immediately sold down, and the sac went live, and then people started sacrificing, and then there was profit taking occurring. And then I remember this particular candle with the wick was like was detrimental. Like it destroyed confidence and short term in Hex, and like people were questioning who did it, because this community was quite small back then. So people with enough firepower to really move price down 54% in just 5 days was predictable to some degree. And there was a buyback on that, and PulseChain sac narrative was in full force. And once again, you had this double bottom maneuver around 10 cents. And this is where we kind of the train started to leave the station for the rest of the bull run. And at this point, Hex really started to overperform the rest of the market to the end of the cycle. Because at this point, like BTC had already topped and ETH had already topped. And so this was just like a hedge play. And I remember we were looking at things like nomics.com and just seeing the price just climb, like every day was climbing. And so from that local low at the end of SAC phase to the high, Hex went up another 4.2x to hit that, like, it was basically like 52 cents. It was, some exchanges got 49 cents, some of them got 56 to get the 10,000x. And there was a deliberate effort to make Hex accomplish its goal of getting the 10,000x. And it was at this period where, you know, all Hexicans felt unstoppable and that this thing was never going to go down. And that's when the PulseX sacrifice phase, as we started to lose these key levels up here in like the 36 cent range, we're only up there for like a month above 36 cents. It was at that point where prices started to decline, and then the PulseX sacrifice was announced, and that gave us a second jolt of energy. So there was like just a couple of major moves here. I kind of want to brush through this because I don't want to spend too much time, but because this is like the less important part of the lesson. But because we're getting into a bull market now, so we need to know the context. Lots of ascending triangles, lots of accumulation where things go sideways for a month and then they rip. Those are hallmarks of a really bullish economy. But this is where we did the PulseX sacrifice. So from that 56 cent high, let's say, down to basically 10 to 12 cents is where we bottomed out. And then this PulseX sac went live. Price ran up another 2x, 2 to 3x. And a lot of sacrifices went on for PulseX during this period. You had people getting in, getting out. The community had multiplied in size by maybe 4 or 5 times from that original 20 to 25,000 user base up to like a couple, like 100,000 to 150,000 potential users. That's when we, after that sacrifice launched, that's when we had a couple things happen. So I remember this period because I went live with Richard Hart for the first time, live from the Rocky Mountains of Colorado on a Hex ski trip. And he had said on the stream that he noticed that there was a brick of liquidity. I think it was like $2 million of liquidity that was placed on Uniswap V3 right below the price, around 20-ish cents. And that was in this zone right here. And there was an attempt to reverse price here to support it and create structure here and to stop it from going lower, but that did not happen. And the market just flipped bearish, and we lost this global trend line, which had been the entire history of Hex. And that kind of started to mark the great fall in some ways of Hex, where that liquidity brick got eaten through. Obviously the market maker, whoever did that, said, well, that's not sustainable. I can't put up $20 million bricks and just get, lose 20 million, like on a regular basis to try to support the price all the way down. So that behavior kind of stopped. And then there was one more brick that was put around 3 to 5 cents. What do I want to say about this? So after PulseX sac was complete, there was like another consolidation attempt, and prices were ranging between 10 and 20 cents. And I remember this was around the time that I launched, I believe it was around the time that I launched Radial, which is where we went deep on like the larger global economics and how they played into why we needed Hex. And during that time, we were in this move here, and the price doubled. It went from 10 to 20 cents. And there was a lot of people that were jumping on the bandwagon that this was going to be like a big rally that would help save Hex. And unfortunately, with all of the headwinds of like the outrage marketing and the Bitcoin and Ethereum bear markets in full force, Hex just didn't have enough to do it on its own. And one of the largest liquidity providers pulled a bunch of liquidity and started dumping out his entire stack and completely destroyed the market structure on Hex and pushed us all the way to him. I would say that player and a couple others really saw the writing on the wall and knew that the doorway was small, just big enough to get a few large players through the doorway safely. And that's what happened. Was there was an exodus out, and a bunch of liquidity was removed, and a bunch of Hex was dumped, and it pushed us from that 20-cent high in May of 22 all the way down to like 3 cents in 46 days. That was devastating for the ecosystem, and everyone was trying to call bottoms, and everyone was trying to say, that where we're gonna pump to off the next rip. And there was attempts made. Even Godwell came in here and bought on one occasion that was right here in October, I believe. Yeah, I want to say it was here in October of 2022. So there was like an effort to support price above that 3 cent level, but it just wasn't enough. And so this is where things get interesting to me. So after, you know, an extended period of a hex bear, and everyone was against us at this point, the price bottomed out around 1.7 cents. And I do remember that. It seemed like an arbitrary level at the time, but it was basically just right under that 2 cent wick high from the New Year's Eve of 2021, right? So it made sense to be an area to try to create some upward price momentum. And so with the imminent PulseChain launch coming, there was one particular market maker that I remember came in here and basically, as price recovered, ejected the price out of this zone and pushed us from like 3 cents all the way up to 4.5 cents. And because I had direct communication with this particular player, I got a little more insight on what was going on during this time frame. And it was a scary time to be a bull in hex, because there was no guarantees that you could get out of this trade, you know, with injecting this much capital in and trying to make something happen, that you wouldn't get in and get out without getting your face ripped off, because it was very much PvP at this point. And so even during this rise in price, going into the PulseChain testnet V3, which launched right at the peak here at 12.5 cents, it was easy to be bullish if you weren't the guy putting the money into the system. There was so many unknowns going into PulseChain, like how much value was going to get diluted through Pulse and PulseX. You know, which hex is going to retain more of the market share, E-Hex or P-Hex. And that's to say nothing about Inc, because everyone at that time was so scared to do liquidity providing, because they had been so conditioned to buy hex and stake it and do nothing else and not learn about blockchain at all, so that most people were too scared to even go into the liquidity pools to start. I'm talking general users, right? So so because there were so many unknowns, there's two key events that happened during this period. During this period here, there was the USDC depeg event. So USDC lost its dollar peg for a brief period of time, and the OA stepped in and bought a bunch of the USDC and saved the price to get it closer to peg. Or, I'm sorry, was it? Yeah, it was USDC. And then people that were in USDC, they rotated their USDC into hex to preserve value in a time where there was uncertainty around USDC. So it kind of worked out nicely, because you had the OA arbing the price of a stable coin, in which he made, I think, 33 million on. Don't quote me on it. He made a bunch of money on that arb, and he prevented from even worse things happening to the stable coin market. And then his users took their USDC and put it into hex to help hex recover in this period here. Because I remember the infamous market maker, who will remain unnamed, was worried here that there was a couple big stakers that were getting like 50 million, 70 million hex stacks all out from their stakes at this time, and then we're liquidating some of it. And so it was like a question of who's got more power to force the price up or force it down. And luckily, the DPEG event gave us enough juice on this rally that price recovered and was structurally intact again. And then things looked good. And then there was the final markup wave going into the PulseChain testnet V3 in I think it was March of 23. And that was actually I was on with Max on his channel and with Crypto Sloth on his channel when that happened. And that was a really fun time to cover as well. I think at the time, you know, a younger version of me thought that maybe we could save the price of E-Hex, or like that we wouldn't see as much collateral damage as we did, and actually thought we would see 20 cents at that time, and we never did. That was like basically that marked the end. And there was a few market makers that it became clear after about 2 or 3 weeks of this that lower highs, lower lows, like structure being broken, like that this was going to be an extended correction. And that's exactly what happened. Too many people looking for the exit door, too many unknowns, and too much value to be pulled out of E-Hex to put it into other places that might be more opportunistic. And on the actual launch of the PulseChain here, it was ahead of the actual announcement from Richard, but somebody saw the blockchain go live and started to absolutely nuke. There was a huge recovery candle on E-Hex here on May 11th. And then when the official announcement came out, like on the 12th or 13th, that it was live, at that point, there already had been a huge correction in play already. And so that's the nature of the beast sometimes with markets, is somebody gets the information first and then they act on it. And that's exactly what happened here. Is some group colluded and got a bunch of value out of it, and good for them. And then the price tried to recover around like 3 cents, and then it was just cascade all the way down. All of these guys that had bought in here and over this period of time were now underwater, and they had to make some decisions. So that set up E-Hex for a pretty brutal last couple of years. I'll close out with this because it's already been going for quite a while. There was 2 events here. I don't know if we need to go into too much detail. There was an alleged scammer that came in here and pumped the E-Hex price like crazy, and stayed in the trade for a while and kept trying to help it stay above this level. But it wasn't until the Richard Hart FUD tweet that P-Hex was the dominant hex did we get this huge crash on E-Hex. That was pretty brutal. Just a few whales, I want to say like 3 or 4 whales, liquidated their E-Hex bags here on these candles and just totally nuked the price. And so ever since then, E-Hex has been trying to find its place in the market, kind of trending sideways between 1/10 of a cent and 0.6 of a cent, with like that 3.5 tenths of a cent being a major level to watch. We can flip that as support. Remember, that goes all the way back to the beginning. So let me go to a weekly and I'll show you that quick. Yeah, so basically back to the beginning, guys, like from the launch price here through the big payday events, setting a bottom, and then now we're just basically, that's the level to beat. Currently, I see a pennant here, so we'll see which way this breaks, but E-Hex still fighting with its early days, the curse of its early days, I guess you could say. In addition to, I just wanted to show this chart, which was, I've got a couple cool things on here. So you can see, I wish Gerardo, if you're listening, I wish we could see E-Hex, P-Hex, and all the PulseChain assets market cap on one thing on here, because that might give us an indicator of where the market cap of everything is sitting. And it's definitely not down here where E-Hex is sitting. What this chart shows is it's the ROI from the launch price. And but if you could see the just the market caps of all of the Richard tickers, we're probably sitting much higher. We're probably sitting up in here somewhere, which is like low enough that it's still behind the trajectory of where ETH was at the time, or Bitcoin, but it's also in terms of its lifespan, but it's also in an area where it's still a huge opportunity for people, to get involved in this ecosystem before it does inevitably have its big blow off moment. So if you take the two prices combined, it's sitting right here. We're at a 30x combined price ish. So E-Hex plus P-Hex, if you had held through the fork, you're at 30x the launch price of E-Hex to this day. And that's just, that's not indicative of your PulseX, or Inc holdings. It's just, had you held liquid Hex from day one, you'd be up 30x. Pretty crazy. I think that's all I really wanted to cover. Max, if you wanted to pull me down or whatever you want to do. We can always, there's always the opportunity to talk about where things could go in the future, but that can be an arduous task at times. But in the short term, P-Hex is looking pretty sweet, if you ask me. that 1 cent level is being retested. That needs to hold a support for consecutive weeks. Like it's got to be able to eat sell pressure at that level and not go below that level for some amount of weeks before I'm comfortable saying that, all right, we're ready to go take out that 2.8 cent resistance level. That's been the bane of P-Hex's existence since launch.